Hello, everyone. Hi, my name's Grant. I'm a bookseller here at Politics and Prose, where we host a range of in-store events along with trips and classes. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask everyone to please silence your cell phones as to not disrupt the event. When we get time for the Q&A portion, we have a mic set up by this right pillar. Please speak into the mic so everyone can hear your question. Tonight's event is being live streamed. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Kate Woodworth, Mike Tidwell, and Jim Lardner to discuss the topic Climate Writing, Climate Action. Kate Woodworth is the author of the novel Racing into the Dark, hailed as a compelling exploration of mental illness by Booklist and as an auspicious debut by Publishers Weekly. Her short stories have appeared in Western Humanities Review, Shenandoah, and other literary journals. In her new book, Little Great Island, Woodworth illustrates in microcosm the greatest changes of our time and the unyielding power of love, as she tells the story of Mari and Harry's life intertwining alongside the shifting climate. Mike Tidwell is a writer and climate activist. His books include Bayou Farewell, about the disappearing wetlands and Cajun culture in South Louisiana, Tidwell's new book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, a story of climate and hope on one American street, tells the story of when Tidwell kept a record for a full year of the growing impacts of climate change on his one urban block right on the border with Washington, D.C. A love letter to the magnificent oaks and other trees dying from record heat waves and bizarre rain, Tidwell's story depicts the neighborhood's battle to save the trees and combat climate change. Woodworth and Tidwell will be in conversation with Jim Lardner. Lardner is a journalist and one of the 70,000 plus members of Third Act, a national organization of Americans over 60 working for a sustainable planet and a credible democracy. His articles have appeared in The New Yorker, The American Prospect, and the New York Review of Books, among other print and other online publications. Please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Kate Woodworth, Mike Tidwell, and Jim Lardner.
All right, thank you, Grant, so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to Politics and Prose for hosting us this evening. You probably noticed this looks a little different from your ordinary author event. There are three of us up here. What we all share is we've all written books, and we continue to write about climate change. We also share a passion for and a commitment to trying to inspire others to take action about the climate. And so each of us come at this from a slightly different angle, and I'm hoping that really hearing from each of us will really help inspire you all to do something every day. Camus said that the purpose of a writer is to keep civilization from destroying itself. Well, I'm an old retired lady, and so as a fiction writer, I thought, he means them. But then, my very wise friend Kate, who's here in the front row, told me one night that creative people are often at the forefront of social change. There might have been cocktails involved, but I still thought it was a great idea. And that actually inspired me. It seemed like a much better thing to do with retirement than to just sit around in a rocking chair. I was already concerned about the climate, and I was already working on some vignettes and character sketches that all took place on an island off the coast of Maine. It's the island of North Haven, which is the real island. Little Great Island fictionalizes it. And those two forces came together, and I realized I'm going to write a climate novel. I had no idea such a thing existed at the time, but it seemed like a great idea. Little Great Island tells the story of the community on this small Maine island that needs to reinvent itself in the face of climate change. Specifically, what's happening is the warming waters in the Gulf of Maine are causing the lobster to go away. I personally think they're all going to Canada, and there's starting to be scientific studies that back that up. The story is told primarily from the point of view of two characters, Mari McGavin and Harry Richardson. Mari is an island-born and raised woman who has been gone from the island for the past 10 years, working on a farm in South Carolina. She knew when she joined this farm that it was called God's Bounty. She knew there was a lot of prayer, but she'd fallen in love and married one of the farmers. They had a son, and she really, like me, she just was respectful of other people's religious beliefs, but didn't really pay much attention until climate change started really impacting the yield and the economics of the farm. Mari was targeted because of her commitment to sustainable practices. She still continues to deny and justify what's happening around her until suddenly she realizes that she and her son are in real danger. She returns to the island on the ferry at the same time as Harry Richardson. Harry is a history professor. He's a high school history professor who has recently been given compassionate leave from his job because 2 years after the death of his wife, he is still really not functioning. And he's returned to the island to sell his family's home. Harry and Mari disagree about the future of this plot of land that Harry's house sits on. I didn't want to just tell the story of the summer people versus the island people. I didn't really want to tell the story of the haves versus the have-nots. That story's been told, and I think there's way too much binary thinking going on in the world today anyway. I wanted to tell the story of the community and all of the different points of view that people have about how to respond to the future in response to climate change. And so the book has a total of 12 different points of view. 11 of them are human, and the 12th is the omniscient point of view, which people have said represents the island's point of view. To me, it is the web of life. It is not just the human web of life, it's the full web of life. All living beings, past and present and future, because all of those things are at stake when we talk about climate change. Somewhere in there, I was really researching this business of climate fiction and what exactly it is, what it does, and the hope initially was that it would cause people to act. I already knew by the time I was writing Little Great Island that that was not the case. A study came out in about 2020 that said actually the empathetic response to fiction only lasts maybe 2 days. And I thought, oh, there's a window of opportunity. So I asked my publisher, can I put a call to action in my book? Not like some character standing up on a soapbox and saying, all right, people, you gotta listen up. But it's actually in the back of the book. And it simply is called Be the Butterfly, and it invites everyone to do one small thing to help mitigate climate change. My publisher thought this was a great idea, and she said, why don't you come up with 12 nonprofits that people could support if they chose? And I said, well, that's not really up to me, because I'm kind of late to this game. People like these gentlemen here have been at this a whole lot longer than I have. So I reached out to other climate writers and got the most gratifying response from people like Bill McGavin and Barbara Kingsolver. All of the climate writers who are participating in Be the Butterfly are listed in the back of the book along with their nonprofits. So that was great, but suddenly I was in a position where I was going to be in front of people like you. And I discovered very quickly that the concerns about the climate are very different depending on where you are. And I thought, why not include people from the area where I'm going to be and have them answer your questions and hear your concerns? As part of that, I thought, let's bring Be the Butterfly into the room with everyone. So hopefully you noticed when you sat down that you have what I call a commitment card and a pencil. And you will be invited later on this evening to fill that out by just telling us one small thing you are willing to do to help save the climate. Ordinarily, I invite one person to come forward and state their butterfly act in front of the group. We are lucky enough tonight that we already have a very brave volunteer and somebody whose voice I think it's important that all of us hear. So before I turn over the microphone, I'm going to read to you just a tiny bit from Little Great Island. These paragraphs are from the point of view of Sam, who is Mari's father. He's a lobsterman, and he has taken a break from his time out pulling his traps to just think for a moment about his life. This section comes about a third of the way into the book. So there are just a couple things you need to know. The Alice Mari is the name of his boat, and the Sisters is just a rocky outcropping. The first of the harbor seals surfaces off the Alice Mari's stern. Sam hears rather than sees it, the great exhalation, more woof than sigh. Turning only his head so as not to startle the animal, he sees the sleek-headed creature regarding him, one eye huge and black and knowing. The other is only a scar. More wet bursts of air, and the waters around Sam are filled with silky snouts and expanding ripples. Sam nods as if in greeting. The sound is of human breathing, but only the seals are present. The Alice Mari is close to the Sisters' shoulders. The goring rocks are a few feet below. Sam has only a handful of minutes before he must motor into deeper water. When the first of the seals shoots from the water onto the protruding shelf of rock beneath the Sisters, the sound is less than that of a swallow. One by one, the creatures catapult themselves from the sea, assume their bow shapes, close their eyes in the increasing warmth of the sun. It rarely fails Sam, this form of ocean prayer. He has so many ways to hope.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. Thank you, Kate. I think Kate is definitely a fiction writer because her book claims she's only written 2 novels. But if you read the book as I have, you'll swear she's been writing fiction and putting out a book once a year. I mean, really, really polished writing with deep, deep meaning on climate change. So thank you for that, Kate. My name's Mike Tidwell. I have been a writer for quite a while. This is my latest book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, a story of climate and hope on one American street. And I live on an island too. It's an island of 14 houses on one block, on one street in Tacoma Park, Maryland, right on the border with Washington, D.C., an old trolley neighborhood of D.C. I've lived there for 34 years. And in normal times, if you live on one street for 3+ decades, you're going to see change. You're going to see clothing fashions change. You're going to see babies born. You're going to see people move away. But in this era of climate change, if you pay attention, you're going to see profound climate changes. And that's what I've seen living on this one street for 30 years. And that was the origin of The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue. The story is primarily, but not exclusively, about the trees that we've lost. We've lost so many big trees in my neighborhood. On my one block, we've lost 500 years worth of tree growth in just the last 5 years. Now, that's a 150-year-old southern red oak, a 150-year-old willow oak, a 100-year-old white oak, and an 80-year-old willow oak on one block in the last 5 years. And it's not me saying it's climate change that's killing these trees. It's our city arborists. It's our public works department. It's the tree experts who come and care for trees and cut them down. It's just been amazing. We've had so many extraordinary rain events. We've just gone through an extraordinary rain event here in the DC area. interspersed with severe droughts, the kind of which we've never seen before. We have ambrosia beetle infestations. We have bigger thunderstorms that knock down trees. It's just pretty amazing. One arborist told me in the course of me researching this book, he said, Mike, our native trees in the mid-Atlantic are no longer native. We've changed the climate, so they're foreigners now. And we shouldn't be surprised that they're getting sick and dying. And one of the questions I ask in the book is, if our native trees are foreigners, what does it make us human beings? You know, part of a 10,000-year-old civilization that is utterly dependent on the amazingly stable climate we've had for the last 10,000 years. We too are getting sick. We too are dying around the world and will continue to do so unless we do something about it. The point that I make in the book is not just our trees are dying, but in my neighborhood, Lyme disease is a huge problem. Our milder winters don't kill off ticks like they used to. I've been managing and coping with chronic Lyme disease for 15 years from a tick bite in my backyard. 3 other of my neighbors have had Lyme disease. 6 members of my church have had Lyme. 3 members of the board of directors of my nonprofit. I could go on and on. 30 years ago, when I moved to Willow Avenue, I didn't know one person with Lyme disease. I wasn't aware of trees dying from all these extreme weather events. The point is, and then there's flooding and there are all these other impacts of climate change just on this square block where I live. The point that I make in the book is climate change has gotten so bad that you could take a spinning lacquered globe and throw a dart at that globe, and wherever it lands, whether it's Southern Africa, Japan, or the 7100 block of Willow Avenue in Tacoma Park, you can write a whole book about the climate impacts and that one microdot. In my book, though, the word hope is in the subtitle, A Story of Climate and Hope on One American Street. I also write that as we've seen in the last few years the passing of trees, we've also seen the coming of clean energy. I mean, in my neighborhood, when a big tree comes down and suddenly there's a lot of sunlight, one of 2 things happen. Either solar panels go up on a suddenly sunny residential roof or a flat roof commercial establishment, or the second thing that's very common, people start gardening. They start growing food in an effort to bring a more sustainable food system in a world of climate stress. In my neighborhood also, there's so many electric cars. I mean, I live in a progressive neighborhood, but wherever you live too, you hear it. My neighbor Paula calls it that faint harmony of angels when an electric car rolls down the street. More and more electric cars. In my neighborhood, the first gas station in America to switch entirely from pumping gas to charging electric cars is in Tacoma Park. RS Automotive, if you have an electric car and you're in Tacoma Park, Maryland, get charged by Depeshwar Doli, an amazing guy. So we've seen the coming of clean energy, but it's not happening fast enough. And that's the argument that I make in the book. I also go into the amazing relationship between people and trees. First of all, trees are amazingly dynamic creatures. We think of them as static. We think of them as silent. They are not. They speak to each other underground and above ground. Parents like to live near their offspring. Parents share nutrients with their offspring. Trees warn each other of impending droughts. They're like a super organism when they live together. They feel pain. They can tell time. They like to sleep. These trees are amazing. And not only that, in my neighborhood and probably in yours, trees become our friends. Arborists told me when a tree dies in a national forest, it's a statistic. It's a number. When it dies in your backyard, it's a friend. And in Tacoma Park, with so many trees dying, we've lost 45 acres of tree canopy since 2018, largely because of extreme weather. That's according to the city statistics. As these trees die, we grieve. We have ceremonies. We write poems. We have moments of silence. We light candles. And there's this grieving that goes on. I also argue that we all know that trees improve our human health. There's this whole concept of forest bathing in Japan. We know from science that being around a tree lowers your stress levels, lowers your cortisol levels. Patients in hospitals who just see a tree through a window recover faster than patients who don't. And one of the arguments one of the questions I ask in the book is, if trees help our health, what happens when they disappear? What happens to our health then? And I think that's another reason why more and more people are getting infectious diseases like Lyme disease. Plus, we're grieving over the loss of our friends, and it just adds to a deterioration of our health. But I will tell you, it is a hopeful book, and that is because no matter what's happening on Capitol Hill, no matter what policies are being rolled back, the reality is every day on this planet, human beings deploy a gigawatt of solar energy every day. That's the equivalent of a major nuclear power plant every day of solar power. Half the cars sold in the biggest automobile market in the world this year, China, will be electric cars. Australia is on its way to nearly 100% clean electricity by 2030, a country known for coal. So these trends are happening, and no leaders in Washington can stop it. Plus, we have the blue states, plus California, Maryland, New England. So we have to keep going. But the number one thing I will tell you is that people ask me, climate change, you freak me out, Mike. You say trees are dying on your block. What can I do about it? Don't give me 10 things to do. Tell me one thing I can do about it. And my answer is always the same. Develop a relationship with one group in your region that's fighting climate change. Get on their email list, make a donation if you can. Individual choices are great. Drive an electric car, become a vegetarian, get solar power. But the number one thing you can do to fight climate change is stop being an individual. Join a group, join a movement, develop a relationship with a group like Third Act. And that's my pitch to Jim.
Thank you. Is this on? All right. I'm not here with a book, but I'm here to tell the tale of an organization, this one up here. And it's a story closely entwined with the biography of its founder, Bill McGavin, who's known as the author of, originally, as the author of The End of Nature, a book that played a major role in bringing the problem of climate change to wide public attention. Well, I was against his turn to that topic, and I will tell you why. I knew Bill originally when we were fellow writers at the New Yorker magazine in the early and mid-1980s, and he was writing stuff like this. This is a piece of his called After the Reading, which was inspired by an item in, I don't know, the New York Post maybe, that was about Muammar Gaddafi, and it said, the item, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi only comes out in the gun-black night with a Russian Kalashnikov rifle slung over his shoulder and a hand. Oh, sorry. I'm not only do I need the microphone, but I need my glasses. And a bandolier around his waist. The colonel has been known to prowl the streets of his capital, shooting slugs from his AK-47 through the brain of any prostitutes or nightclub performers he can find. The mad Libyan who outlawed booze, dice, and adultery and cuts off the hands of his thieves is also a published author. So Bill wrote this piece called After the Reading, imagining a book and author luncheon with Muammar Gaddafi. And the first question is, Colonel, Virginia Woolf once said that a writer needs a room of his or her own and 500 pounds a year. Would you comment? Gaddafi says, I think Virginia was onto something. You absolutely need a quiet place all to yourself. At a certain stage in my life, I considered moving to a farm and learning to vibrate with the small rhythms of the natural world. But the blazing desert sun and all the sand, very little grew. Now I have a nice corner in the Hall of Justice for my desk. Next question is, I'm just starting out. I had a story in last month's Gulf of Sidra review, but I'm worried. What can fame do to a writer? He replies, fame can be the greatest trap of all because it is the most comfortable. Let me tell you a story. A few weeks ago on a publicity tour, I was doing Merv. He's syndicated now, not network, but we go back a long way, so I stopped by. I'm waiting in the green room to go on, and all of a sudden, Joey Heatherton pops in. Normally, I would have shot her in the brain without even thinking, but you begin to move in that world long enough, and you start to lose touch with your authentic self. Your roots, pulled out of their native sand, begin to wither. My first thought when I saw her was to ask if she'd been in Vegas lately and how was Shecky. But if you lose yourself, you're over as a writer. I made myself shooter. And then Charo minces in. No speaky English, I ask her. Kerpow. And then the last question is about whether a writer should stick with a typewriter or get a word processor. And Gaddafi ends up saying, if you can afford one, buy it, but you don't need the 512K top-of-the-line model, not unless you're writing a Civil War saga, brother against brother. 256K is plenty. So my theory at the time was that comic writing of this sort was far too precious to trade for another dime a dozen doom-saying prophet. But over the years, I've mellowed on this subject and come around to appreciating the value of Bill's recent work. And I will tell you that he wrote The End of Nature believing or hoping that he would arouse the world to action through the force of hard evidence, only to learn over the years that, as he says, he was in a fight rather than an argument. That discovery led Bill in 2008 to found 350.org, a group of committed young folks, and then in 2021 to found Third Act, a group of committed older folks generally over 60. The theory behind Third Act goes like so. First of all, what was our first act? Maybe idealism in the 60s and 70s. Second act, crass careerism. Third act, we are free to devote ourselves to what really matters. And we have a sense of generational responsibility. We have unusual political clout. And we no longer have to worry about our resumes. So we could get arrested, for example, and it's not going to hurt our careers. So Third Act, my first acquaintance with Third Act was going out to a rocking chair painting party in Arlington where we painted rocking chairs that we then set up in front of 5 banks in downtown DC, protesting their continued funding of the fossil fuel industry. Later, I drove a truck full of rocking chairs to New York and did the same thing at Citibank. And I'm not going to be here for a book signing, but if you want to know more about Third Act, come see me. I see some people who are of the proper demographic. And now I'm going to turn it back to Kate to talk about her Be the Butterfly effort.
Thank you both. That was wonderful. Yes, indeed, we do have a responsibility, all of us of a certain generation. And so I am going to ask you all to consider filling out your Be the Butterfly cards now. But I'm also going to invite our special guest to come up here and declare his butterfly act for all of you.
For my butterfly act, I will help the planet by recycling. Not only that, I will put stuff that goes in the recycling. I will probably use it first for some crazy cardboard box invention that I have no clue what I'm building. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Earlier this week, I was in an elementary school talking to second graders all the way up through 7th graders about what they knew about climate change and also what they felt about climate change. We hear about how young people are very anxious about their future. I think many of them are. But I also, to me, the more hopeful and the more important piece is that we can have empathy for these children. We can feel their pain at their anxiety over the uncertain future that they have. We can have empathy not just for our own children and grandchildren, but for all of the children and grandchildren in the world. We also can feel empathy for the natural world, for the trees that are falling down, trees that are our friends, for all of the animals that are going extinct all of the time, even for the loss of the lobster, which are not exactly cute and fuzzy, but we all know what they are and we all like them. So I think we're ready for Q&A. If anybody has a question, feel free to step up to the microphone, or if you're feeling a little shy, feel free to shout it out. Just let us know who you're addressing your question to.
Well, while people are gathering their thoughts, I want to ask you, Kate, why did you write your novel?
Well, I'm a novelist, so I'm always writing something. But at the time I started working on this book, I was trying very hard not to write a novel. I was merely playing with these pages that were character sketches and vignettes. It was really, I was thinking of it almost more as a love song to a place that I hold very dear to my heart. At the same time, I was very concerned about climate change. And what that looked like for me was a lot of complaining about how nobody was doing anything. And I had that realization that I wasn't actually doing anything either, which, to be clear, I was doing the basic things. I was recycling, I was using my cloth shopping bags, but I didn't feel I was making a difference. And I realized that the way for me to make a difference was to do what it is that I was already doing, which is to write a novel. I came to it a little reluctantly. I mean, again, I did not know that there was such a thing as climate fiction. So there was a pretty steep learning curve for me to figure it out. And then, as I mentioned, it was also a little disheartening to realize that climate fiction was not making the difference that I hoped it would make. A lot of early climate fiction was post-apocalyptic or science fiction, and I object to that because it gives the impression that climate change is something that's going to happen later. It's happening right now, and we need to view it that way. And I'm actually going to pass that question back to both of you because I think the kind of origin story of this commitment is interesting.
Well, I'll just say that in the early 2000s, I had read Bill McKibben's book, The End of Nature, a decade earlier, and I'd gone into my own kind of denial. I didn't deny that climate change was happening in the 1990s. I just denied that it was going to really affect me and my family in any significant way. And by the early 2000s, the science was just so mind-bending in terms of what was happening in the Arctic, what was happening with global temperatures, that I decided I was going to become an activist. But first, I got really mad. I got mad at all my friends that they weren't thinking about this and wrestling with this question. I got mad at the campuses that the students weren't rioting over global warming. I got mad at the Washington Post that they weren't writing an editorial every day about climate change. And then I realized, Mike, you're not out there. You're not doing something about this. How can you possibly get mad at anybody else for not being out there? And that's when I walked away from my own freelance journalism career and organized the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. But I will tell you that 23 years ago, when I founded this nonprofit and became a full-time climate activist, our goal 20 years ago was always, we can't stop climate change, but by switching to clean energy fast enough, we can avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We always tack that on, mitigate the most disastrous outcomes of climate change, however you want to phrase it. But then 20 years later, in 2022, when I saw all the trees dying in my neighborhood, I decided I wanted to write The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, my book, because the worst impacts were starting to happen. We had not switched to clean energy fast enough. So we have to take it to the next level. And the next level for me is something called negative emissions. Scientists now tell us the planet is warmed so much that we not only have to stop emitting carbon dioxide through fossil fuels, but we have to, through clean energy, but we have to absorb CO2 that's already in the atmosphere and somehow secure it in the oceans or underground. And that's why one of the characters in my book is a professor at the University of Maryland named Ning Zhang, who has this quixotic but scientifically viable idea to bury all the trees that are dying in record numbers in the mid-Atlantic. He's observed it too. To bury these trees as much as you can in low oxygen clay on farmland outside of Baltimore, outside of DC. So in my book, I follow this scientist as he tries to cut through government red tape and get the permits and negotiate with farmers and transport whole tree trunks to a burial site in Cecil County, Maryland. And it's just amazing. We have a funeral and we cry as we bury these trees. So we not only have to switch to clean energy. I wanted to write this book because we also need to do more on negative emissions. And there's also part of the book that's about reflecting sunlight away from the planet. There are those who think that we need something called geoengineering, that if we reflected sunlight like volcanoes do, when volcanoes erupt, they naturally emit sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere that cool the planet temporarily. Could we become a human volcano temporarily? It's wildly controversial, but more and more people are talking about it. So I sort of cover that narrative as well.
I do want to say something, but I also want to first see if we have a question from the audience. I see one. I see you, sir, and you, ma'am. Come to the mic.
While they're coming up, what is burying the trees accomplish?
So the trees have absorbed carbon for 50, 100, 150 years. Yeah, that was a key part. I should have mentioned that. If you send them to the landfill, or you incinerate them in a trash incinerator, or you wood chip them and for a playground, that wood is going to decompose rapidly and vent its carbon back into the atmosphere. If you bury the trees, you can lock that carbon into the ground. Ning Zhang calls it reverse coal. In the right soil, those trees will stay mostly undecomposed for 1,000 years. So we want to lock their carbon in. As more and more trees die, we don't want their carbon flushed into the atmosphere.
So while climate fiction is now more widespread and fashionable, and yet still so much of it's all about how bad things can get. There's this background and everything. And so one of the practices I've been engaged with, including here, is when I run into authors and have the opportunity, especially speculative fiction authors, I ask them, it's like, well, this is a time where we really need to have some kind of vision about how the future might evolve in a positive way, not just surviving, but some kind of what kind of transition is plausible in terms of actually creating a sustainable society, which could be very different, and which, of course, we have all these taboos going back to the Cold War and that kind of thing about imagining a different kind of a society and economy. So I would ask these different authors, it's like, okay, what about it? Why is this so hard? Why does it seem so hard to imagine a transition, a plausible transition to a different kind of society? We know it's complex. There's lots of different issues there, but isn't that part of your job as a writer to be imagining that, taking on that job?
Absolutely. And welcome to my world and why it took me 10 years to finish this book. Mike mentioned the word hope, and it is one of the challenges of a climate fiction writer to find hope, because you don't want to end your book by saying, and then everyone died and the planet went up in flames and hey, there's a bestseller. But I couldn't figure it out because I thought, why is it up to me? I write fiction. I don't know how to solve climate change. And it really was a long and difficult process for me to finally recognize that I believe in us. I believe in us as human beings. I believe in our ability to do better and to be better than we are. And when I say us, I am an English major. I choose my words carefully. I'm not talking about you guys, and we all have it right. And I'm also not talking about how everyone in this room has it right, but all those bad guys out there who sort of voted for the wrong administration got it wrong. There's no us, them. There's no binary thinking here. Every single one of us can dig a little deeper and try a little harder. What does that look like? To me, it involves things like recognizing we can do with a little bit less. Even though life is very busy and we're very used to doing things the easy way, we can actually use a little willpower, step back and do a little bit less. I think it also really comes from recognizing that we are all in this together. Everybody across the planet is in this together. We all have a right to survive. We all have the right to know that our children and grandchildren will be on a planet that will work for them to sustain their life. And I think it's recognizing that, it's that global empathy that gives me hope. Little Great Island is obviously, it's about a small community on an island off the coast of Maine. It is absolutely meant to indicate a microcosm. It is meant to reflect the larger society, which is why all those different points of view are in there. In Little Great Island, all those different people want what they want. All of them have justifiable reasons, at least in their life, and I worked pretty hard for those to be the kinds of justifiable reasons that the reader could relate to. And then tragedy hits. And that's when all of them realize what their priorities are. And as I thought about that, I thought I would love to be able to say to groups of people, we need to get it together before tragedy hits. But tragedy is hit. Just because it hasn't hit us doesn't mean it hasn't hit. So we need to start digging deeper, and we need to start doing it now. That's my answer as a fiction writer.
Thank you very much. I'm just wondering, in your work with other authors, what was their response to your approach and to include action component to your book, and then around the publication and distribution of your book?
It's been incredibly and gratifyingly positive. I can tell the Bill McGavin story. I know fiction writers. I actually don't read a lot of nonfiction. So the first person I invited was Peter Heller, and he said yes, and I thought that was really fun. So I was talking to my husband, and I was saying, hey, that's worked. And he said, well, you should have a nonfiction writer. And I'm like, ooh, maybe suggest one. And he said, well, Bill McGavin. So I go to my computer. These days, everybody's easy to find. Emailed this Bill McGavin person and told him what I was up to. I literally heard back from him within about 20 minutes. And he said, well, my brother is a lobster fisherman in Maine, so I guess I'm in. Wow. So around that time, I said, okay, I'm doing that thing again where I'm just talking to writers in this country. Duh. I'm part of an organization called the Climate Fiction Writers League. So I reached out to my colleagues there and invited people from across the world to participate in that and Be the Butterfly. And I got responses from them. So it's been absolutely astounding and amazing. And a lot of people who, I've invited all of these butterfly authors to come with me on events. They're a little busy right now. They're trying to save the national parks. They're trying to save the ocean. They're trying to save us. These are the fiction writers, and that's what they're out there doing. So, yeah, it's been phenomenal.
And I'll say that my experience is that a lot of people take action when you ask them, and that's the role of the activist, is to ask people to take action, put a vision out there, help people see that vision is achievable, that it's morally imperative, and that there are practical steps that you can take. Taking one action, pledging to one action tonight is the beginning of that. But I'll say again that the number one thing that you can do to fight climate change is to develop a relationship with a group that will continue to ask you to take action, that will give you an avenue to contribute, to make a phone call when the city council is taking a vote, to show up for a rally, to donate money. And most people, when they can identify with the group, when they develop that relationship, then they have new friends and they feel empowered, and it's addictive. Running a grassroots campaign to stop a power plant being built and winning is addictive. Running a grassroots campaign to pass a legislation that incentivizes offshore wind farms is addictive. And I would say to you, if you're here tonight, you're probably concerned about this issue of climate change. And if you're not in relationship with a group in this region, Interfaith Power and Light, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, the DC and Maryland chapters of the Sierra Club, Virginia Sierra Club, Third Act, for those of us over 60, their campuses, every campus in this country has a climate group. Google's an amazing thing. You can begin that relationship with a group today.
And actually, on that note, Jim, do you want to tell us a little bit about Sunday?
Yeah, and I wanted to say first, what I omitted in describing Third Act's mission is that it's not just, am I audible? Not just devoted to climate action, but also to securing a real, credible democracy, because those two things are inextricably tied together. The fossil fuel industry spent oodles of money electing Donald Trump president, and therefore, people have a very different view of fossil fuel use and the climate than do our leaders, because of where our leaders get their money from. And yes, I will say something about Sunday. Sunday is a project that Third Act is gearing towards in September, which is going to be a celebration of and an education about the transition to solar power. And if you get involved with any of the organizations that Mike has just mentioned, including Third Act, one of the things you can do is think about Sunday actions here in town. By the way, I thought I would ask you a question, Mike. Maybe you could tell folks about your work to remove invasive vines and how that led to more citizen activism.
I will answer that question. I do want to say that there's a little bit of pause between sun and day. So it's Sunday. So it's the day in September, the autumnal equinox, that we're going to promote solar power around the world. We're going to have events, distributed events like the original Earth Day, but all around the world to celebrate the fact that solar energy is and will continue to be one of our lifelines in the world of climate change, and we need to go even faster. So mark your calendar, September 21. There are going to be environmental groups all around you, faith groups, justice groups, all having rallies and celebrating Sunday. And yes, I will say in my book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, one of the things, the book is about me living on the same block for 34 years, and the things that I've seen 34 years ago when I moved to Willow Avenue in Tacoma Park, Maryland. There were no deer, for one thing. I don't remember any deer at all. Now there's tons of them spreading Lyme disease. I don't remember anyone with Lyme disease. I also don't remember invasive vines killing trees. I mean, if you open your eyes wherever you go in the East, you will see trees dying in plain sight from English ivy and Asian bittersweet and all these different vines that are foreigners. They've come here, they outcompete the native vines, and they kill trees. And so one thing that we did in Tacoma Park was we walked all 36 miles of roads and streets in our neighborhood and park paths, and we did an inventory of all the trees, the adult trees that were in danger, in the estimation of a scientist we hired, were in danger of dying from invasive vines within 5 to 7 years. Shockingly, it was about nearly 5,000 trees in Tacoma Park. So we organized volunteers. Every Saturday morning, we met in the parking lot of the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Food Co-op, rain or shine, every Saturday morning at 8:30, and we went out and systematically with here are your 10 addresses from our survey. We know that there are trees at these addresses, and we systematically saved almost 90% of those trees. It was just amazing, and it had never been done before like this. Volunteer power with a baseline, a survey, and a dedicated regular weekly event. It took 14 months. And we did it. We developed amazing relationships with people and their trees. We educated them. And you can learn more at ChesapeakeClimate.org.
And you built a community of activists.
So did you have a follow-up question? You kind of lingered there by the microphone for a while. Okay. Does anyone else have a question? All right, I do hope you will fill out your commitment cards. If you don't, please make sure to give it back to me. We don't want to waste any paper. And I want to especially thank Sawyer for being brave enough to come up and state your Butterfly Act. And Sawyer, my Butterfly Act, I promise I will do everything I can to ensure that you have a safe and sustainable planet on which you can grow up and raise your family.